I plan to be with that movement wherever he is, raising my voice, not as a leader. As a leader, I'm one voice among others. I'm an older voice, been around longer. But it's just one voice among others. But it's in the process, not just here, but around the world. And I do believe that if the revolution in Egypt is successful, we have a full-scale transfer of power from military elites to ordinary citizens that's going to generate even more powerful repercussions. Because as I said before, this is international, profoundly internationally intertwined. But thanks for the question. You can see I don't have a definitive answer because it's too fluid.
I appreciate it.
You shared a lot about some of your traditions. One tradition that maybe we share is Gibran said, the ultimate form of giving is when you give up yourself. And I really feel that you're the perfect example of a person who gives up themselves to the movement for social justice. I want to thank you for being here first and foremost.
Very kind of you, my brother.
I'm involved with a group here on campus. It's affiliated with the National Students for Justice in Palestine. And a lot of times when we're talking about Palestine or when we're talking about U.S. involvement in any sort of foreign policy, it's very detached from conversations of race and conversations of power and privilege. To what extent do you feel foreign policy, American foreign policy, is grounded in issues of race, specifically as it relates to the ongoing occupation of Palestine and Palestine?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It's a complicated one because anytime you're talking about foreign policy, you're talking about a number of different things at work. You're talking about financial interests, you're talking about geopolitical interests, you're talking about the relation of corporate elites on the one hand and politicians and what various options are in light of the historical situation that they found themselves. So that, for example, after 1945, at the end of the age of Europe is a devastated continent, dependent on two empires, the Soviet Empire and the U.S. Empire. And that sets the framework from 45 until the collapse of the Soviet Empire. And so when you talk about the Middle East, for example, it's a choice. Are you going to go to the Soviets or are you going to the United States? The choice of Nelson Mandela. That's why Nelson Mandela was viewed as the world's most notorious terrorist by the U.S. government. Up until 2007. Condoleezza took him off the list. Appreciate it, Condoleezza. Because Nelson Mandela had to make a choice. We're going to go to the Soviet Empire, go to the U.S. Empire. The U.S. Empire made it very clear, we're not siding with the black movement, the black freedom movement, so he goes to the Soviet Empire. And that was one of the reasons why Nelson Mandela went straight to Palestine as well. Because in that particular highly complicated, delicate situation, Israeli-Palestinians with Israeli, Arab and Palestinians, 20% of the state of Israel itself, and then ugly occupation. And then our Jewish brothers and sisters who jumped out of the burning buildings of Europe because of vicious hatred against them, but land on precious Arab bodies. So how are you going to work out the security that is very important for Jewish brothers and sisters, but also justice that's very important for the folk who are there? And when you side with the U.S. Empire puts less value on Palestinian lives than it does on Israeli lives. That's a fundamental fact. You know that. That's why Barack Obama would sit there and see 500 folk massacred and not say a mumbling word just before he took office. And everybody knows that was 500 lives of person, Jewish brothers and sisters. You had a press conference at 2 o'clock in the morning. Why? Because the history of the connection between the very fragile state of Israel with the U.S. Empire. And so the question becomes, how do we tell the truth, which is to say, the suffering on both sides? The suffering on both sides. And yet, historically, which is to say since 1948, it has been very, very difficult in the United States to highlight the preciousness of Palestinian babies and men and children and somehow not be viewed as anti-Semitic. I get that all the time. Are you always talking about the Palestinians? You must hate Jews. No, I'm serious about that. I'm serious about that. Now, my Jewish brothers and sisters are precious. But they're human beings, and any people who occupy another people are involved in an immoral activity, and it needs to be said explicitly. But what do you think about the fact that you never we debate about that. So listen, in the occupation, what's the whole occupation? See what's going on. Security of Jewish brothers is very important. The last thing anybody should want to see. Our Jewish brothers and sisters treated the way they were by the vicious Nazis. Not Africans, not Asians, the highly sophisticated and refined Germans who produced Beethoven and Lessing and Kant and Hegel, but were thugs at the core when it came to our Jewish brothers and sisters. But then when you see that kind of indifference among our Jewish conservative and right-wing brothers and sisters in the Middle East, who talk about Palestinians, sometimes in language that is near or as bad as what the Nazis said about them. You say, wait a minute. Somebody's got to talk about the truth and justice, as well as the security. And as you know how difficult it is. But Edward Said and Mark Ellis and others have played a very important role in this regard in terms of broadening the discussion. I go back to the 1970s when you couldn't even use the word occupation in the New York Times. That was an ideological construct. Now they use it all the time. Why? Because they're coming closer to the truth. So that's just the beginning of an answer, my brother. But good luck in your work, and just make sure you keep love and justice in your heart on both sides, concerned with the humanity of all of those things.
Hello, sir. My name is Krista Gladney, and I'm a visiting scholar here. I have your album, and I listen to it all the time.
You want to never forget?
Sir?
Is it never forget or is it sketchy?
It is never forget. It is never forget. These 3 words, I'm going to tell you, I'm tired.